Henry Winkler's story is often remembered through a single image, a leather jacket, a thumbs up, and a character who defined an era of American television. But behind that cultural icon was a life shaped by doubt, struggle, and reinvention. What looks like overnight success was built on years of quiet suffering and persistence. His journey spans from childhood humiliation to global fame, and later to long professional exile. It is the story of how the world can celebrate someone so completely that it forgets the person inside the role, and how that same world can take decades to rediscover him again. A childhood marked by silence and expectation, Henry Franklin Winkler was born in 1945 in Manhattan to German Jewish parents who had fled Nazi Germany. Survival shaped their household, and so did expectation. His father rebuilt a business, his mother maintained strict order at home, and success was not optional. It was proof that sacrifice meant something. Henry, however, struggled in school from an early age. Words refused to stay still on the page, and learning became a daily battle. Instead of understanding, he received frustration. Instead of support, he received labels that made him believe he was fundamentally incapable of meeting the world's expectations. A mind misunderstood. As a child, Henry was unaware that his difficulty with reading had a name. Dyslexia was not widely recognized in his school environment, and his struggles were interpreted as laziness or lack of intelligence. Teachers pushed him harder, and his confidence eroded with each failure. At home, pressure intensified rather than softened. He learned to compensate, memorizing instead of reading, and relying on instinct instead of ease. Over time, he internalized the belief that something was wrong with him. Yet beneath that struggle was a mind that processed the world differently, one that would later prove powerful in unexpected ways. The stage as an escape. Everything changed when Henry discovered acting as a child. On stage, the rules that governed his academic life no longer applied. He didn't need to read quickly or perform under timed pressure. Instead, he could listen, observe, and transform. Memorization became a strength rather than a burden, and performance offered something school never did: freedom. Acting allowed him to step outside the identity that had been imposed on him. For the first time, he wasn't defined by failure. He was defined by possibility, imagination, and the ability to become someone entirely new with confidence and control. Yale and the making of an actor. Despite academic struggles, Henry's dedication carried him into Emerson College and eventually into the prestigious Yale School of Drama. His acceptance there was a turning point, though it did not erase the doubts he carried. At Yale, he worked relentlessly, often harder than his peers, compensating for reading difficulties with discipline and repetition. He refined his craft under demanding instruction and began shaping a professional identity grounded in resilience. Even without knowing it yet, he was building the foundation for a career that would depend not just on talent, but on adaptability under pressure. The audition that changed everything. In the early 1970s, Henry moved to Los Angeles and struggled through small roles and uncertain prospects. Then came an audition for a sitcom called Happy Days. The role was meant to be minor, a background greaser with limited lines. Henry approached it differently. He didn't play the character as a stereotype, but as someone masking insecurity with confidence. That interpretation transformed everything. Producers saw something magnetic and unexpected. Instead of fading into the background, the character began to expand. What was supposed to be a small part became the center of an entire television universe. The rise of the Fonz. Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli quickly became a cultural phenomenon. Audiences connected instantly with his effortless confidence and quiet emotional depth. Within a short time, he overshadowed the rest of the cast and became the defining image of Happy Days. Henry Winkler was suddenly everywhere, on magazine covers, lunchboxes, toys, and television screens across America. The character's gestures and style entered popular culture. What began as a supporting role became a national obsession. For the first time, Henry was no longer struggling to be seen. He was impossible to ignore, elevated to a level of fame few actors ever experience. Fame as a cage, but fame brought its own limitations. Henry was no longer viewed as an actor with range, but as the character he played. Everywhere he went, people expected the same gestures, the same voice, the same personality. The success that should have expanded his career instead narrowed it. Casting directors struggled to imagine him beyond the role that defined him. While the world celebrated Fonz, Henry found himself increasingly trapped inside him. The identity he had created for performance began to overshadow the person who had created it, leaving him both visible and strangely constrained. The long shadow of typecasting. As Happy Days dominated television, Henry faced an unexpected consequence: professional stagnation. The more iconic Fonz became, the harder it was for audiences and industry professionals to see him differently. Opportunities diminished rather than expanded. He was too recognizable to disappear into new roles, yet too defined by one character to be reinvented easily. What had once been triumph slowly became limitation. For years after the show ended, he struggled to find roles that matched his abilities. The industry that once elevated him now hesitated to move beyond the image it had helped create. Recognition delayed. Decades later, recognition finally returned in a different form. At 72, Henry Winkler received an Emmy Award that acknowledged not just a single performance, but a lifetime of contribution to television and storytelling. The moment was emotional, not because it marked the peak of success, but because it represented acknowledgement long delayed. Applause filled the room as he stood holding the award, visibly moved. It was less a sudden rise than a long overdue correction. An industry revisiting its past judgments and finally recognizing the depth of an artist it had once reduced to a single role. Conclusion: beyond the character. Henry Winkler's life cannot be understood through fame alone. It is a story of adaptation, resilience, and the complicated relationship between identity and recognition. He was shaped by early misunderstanding, defined by a role that both elevated and confined him, and ultimately rediscovered on his own terms. The Fonz made him famous, but it did not define the full extent of his talent or humanity. His journey shows how easily the world can mistake a character for a person, and how long it can take to correct that misunderstanding.